Dr. King, in view of the way that so many clergymen and other religious people have taken part in the civil rights and other movements, do you think that the churches and clergy are reasserting a moral responsibility and a moral leadership in a nation that is considered largely materialistic in outlook?
Yes, I definitely feel that the church is gaining new life on this question and reasserting moral leadership. I have felt all along that the church, being the moral guardian of the community, had to take a basic forthright stand on the issue of civil rights. And naturally, there have been moments when I've been disappointed with the stand of the church, but I think in the last few years, the church has been amazingly relevant on this issue, and this has been most encouraging.
Do you think this means a commitment on the part of the clergy to eradicate evil and inequality throughout the world?
I think it does. Now, I must make a distinction here between what I see on the one hand as basic creative stands on the part of the church in general, church bodies, and the stand on the part of individual congregations. There's still a gulf between church bodies taking a stand on this issue and many church local congregations. Many of them are still all too slow. But I think the major denominations within Protestantism, and certainly the Roman Catholic Church and the Jewish synagogues generally, are committed to take a greater stand on all of the social evils that face our day.
When it comes to the issue of war and peace, how far do you think a clergyman should go in the matter of asserting leadership? I have in mind particularly now the conflict in Vietnam. What can the clergyman do? What should he do?
I think the clergyman first must, in his messages and through his congregation, seek to get to the ideational roots of war, so to speak, and seek to take a general stand against war itself. There have been too many instances where individual clergymen and the church in general gave a kind of moral sanction to war as if it was a holy venture. And it is my strong feeling that we've got to make it clear that war itself is the enemy of mankind. And as President Kennedy said, unless we put an end to war, war will put an end to mankind. Along with this, I think we've got to deal with specific wars and speak to the nation and the world honestly about them. And this is why I'm very happy that the National Council of Churches, for instance, Pope Paul, and many of the Jewish rabbis of the country have come out in very vocal and forthright terms, calling for a negotiated settlement in this situation, calling for the recognition of Red China in order to ease tensions in Southeast Asia, calling for a cessation of the bombings in the north, and other things that are vitally necessary, I think, to bring about peace in that very turbulent situation.
1 week ago today, 9 Negro students were turned away from a white high school in Little Rock, Arkansas by National Guardsmen. That act precipitated a showdown between the state of Arkansas and the government of the United States. Reports say it was done at the verbal order of Governor Orville Faubus. Why did he do it, and what will he do next? Perhaps we can learn the answers right now. Frank McGee of NBC News is seated with the governor in the living room of the Executive Mansion in Little Rock right now.
The sovereign state of Arkansas and the United States government are engaged in a contest of titanic proportions. In its largest sense, the issue will determine which is supreme, the power of the state or of our federation of states. In a lesser sense, the issue is integration or continued segregation of public schools in the South. And in a personal sense, the contest is between Governor Orville Faubus of Arkansas and President Eisenhower. Governor Faubus challenged the power of the federal government when he ordered his National Guardsmen to turn 9 Negro students away from a white high school in Little Rock. A federal court had ordered that school opened to them. The governor has insisted that had he permitted them to enter, violence would have erupted. Sir, with 200 armed National Guardsmen to do the job, why did you not permit the Negro students to enter the school and let the Guardsmen proceed to prevent the violence?
Because if the Negroes enter the school, then violence will erupt at various points throughout the city and perhaps throughout the state. It's rather difficult to have a guardsman or a federal marshal either to go in and have one of these students sit in his lap during the entire term of school, or at least for a time. And I must disagree with your premise in announcing the program. I do not mean and have had no intention of challenging the federal union. I have been a strong believer in it all my life, and I still am. But the maintenance of the peace and order of a community is paramount to other considerations.
Yes, sir. The Negro students were obeying the law. Those who would prevent them from entering the school would be violating the law.
No, they're obeying law and keeping the peace and order of the community.
As the chief protector of the peace, is it not your first duty to guard those who are obeying the law and move against those who are not?
President Eisenhower, the United States Supreme Court, and every intelligent thinking person in this nation realizes that this is a problem that cannot be settled overnight. In all of the statements of the president, in the original decree of the court, it was recognized that this is a problem in which time would be required to reach a solution. Now, the record will reveal that we have made more progress in Arkansas than any other southern state toward implementing the decree of the Supreme Court. At least 7 of the public schools of the state are already integrated. The University of Arkansas, a state-supported institution, is integrated, and all the state colleges save one, and there were no applicants. It would have been implemented there had there been applicants to that school.
Today in Washington, it's Thursday, July 25th. You are looking at the United States Supreme Court, where the special Watergate prosecutor's confrontation with President Nixon reached a climax yesterday with a unanimous decision ordering the president to furnish the subpoenaed tapes. Responding last evening, the White House said the president would accept the court's decision, would comply with its ruling in all respects. The review of the tapes will begin right away. And so President Nixon has lost his case in the Supreme Court.
The announcement that President Nixon will abide by the Supreme Court decision and turn over the subpoenaed White House tapes to the special Watergate prosecutor was made in San Clemente, California, where Mr. Nixon is taking a vacation. NBC News White House correspondent Tom Brokaw was there.
After spending more than 2 hours with President Nixon reviewing the Supreme Court ruling, James St. Clair, the president's chief defense lawyer, appeared before reporters to read Mr. Nixon's announcement that he would comply with the decision.
For the future, it will be essential that the special circumstances of this case not be permitted to cloud the rights of presidents to maintain the basic confidentiality without which this office cannot function. By complying fully with the court's ruling in this case, I hope and trust that I will contribute to strengthening rather than weakening this principle for the future.
Presidential Press Secretary Ron Ziegler refused to speculate on just how long it would take to get those tapes in order. Ziegler also said that the court's decision has not impaired the president in any way, and he urged the House of Representatives to conclude the impeachment question as swiftly as possible. Tom Brokaw, NBC News, with the president in Southern California.
At mid-morning today, the president says goodbye to the cabinet and the White House staff in a Rose Garden ceremony and then leaves Washington on an Air Force jet bound for his home in San Clemente, California. His resignation as the 37th President of the United States takes effect at noon today, Eastern Time, and at that moment in the Oval Office, Vice President Gerald Ford will be sworn in as the 38th Chief Executive. There is here in Washington a great sense of relief and hope that the turmoil of the last 2 years is over at last. Here is part of what President Nixon said in his resignation speech delivered last night.
To have served in this office is to have felt a very personal sense of kinship with each and every American. In leaving it, I do so with this prayer. May God's grace be with you in all the days ahead.
The transition of power will be swift, and it would seem on the surface relatively uncomplicated. Here is more on the final hours of the Nixon presidency from NBC News White House correspondent Tom Brokaw.
Richard Nixon will leave the White House today as President of the United States, and he will arrive in California as a private citizen. His letter of resignation to the Secretary of State's White House office in the West Wing of the White House will arrive around noon Eastern Time while Mr. Nixon is aboard Air Force One en route to California. As he leaves the White House, President Nixon and his family will be saying goodbye to members of the White House staff and the cabinet in public ceremonies in the East Room. That will be a bittersweet occasion for those people who have been through so much with President Nixon. Most of them are sad, many are angry, and some are relieved now that the agony of this decision-making process is over. While President Nixon goes off to California, most members of that White House staff and all members of the cabinet will be going back to their offices to prepare for the transition to a new administration, the administration of Gerald Ford. Tom Brokaw, NBC News at the White House.
Good morning. In the news this morning, the Joint Congressional Committee investigating the Iran-Contra affair expected to hear from 3 witnesses today. Former National Security Advisor Robert McFarland will return to the witness chair, as Bryant said, to rebut some of the testimony given by Oliver North. Committee members will also hear from a security officer who handled classified documents at the White House. But the first order of business this morning, one last opportunity for the committee to question Oliver North. Bob Kerr at the Capitol this morning with more on that. Bob?
Good morning, John. Well, the committee could have finished with North by about 8 last night, but partly because committee members could not count on evening TV coverage, a decision was made to wait. North has certainly had his share of coverage, and now all 26 members want theirs.
I would say after lecturing the committee for 4 days, it was North's turn to listen.
We have been supplying lethal weapons to terrorist nations, trading arms for hostages, altering and shredding national security documents, lying to the Congress. Democracy cannot survive that kind of abuse.
In America, disagreement with the policies of the government is not evidence of lack of patriotism.
There was reaction to North's assertion that the Iran-Contra scheme developed because of congressional indecision on Contra aid.
Thanks, Bob. We get the White House view of the Iran-Contra hearings now from Andrea Mitchell, who is in our Washington newsroom. Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, John. Well, no matter how stinging the criticism of the president's policies, White House officials feel they've dodged a few bullets at the hearings and are getting a side benefit: increased public support for the Contras. First, while the president left town to promote his economic program, a combative White House went on the attack. Backed by Republican allies on the Iran committee, aides denied that Mr. Reagan ever knew that covert activities were being financed by profits from the Iran arms sales. In Indianapolis, the president also lashed out at his critics.
So I invite my critics, I welcome my critics, to go after me on the issues just as hard as they please. We'll let the people decide who's right and who's wrong.
White House officials are bullish because they detect a groundswell for the president's policies, including Contra aid, after Oliver North's testimony. And Mr. Reagan will try to capitalize on that today, meeting with 2 new aides hired to promote Contra aid. Despite denials, they've been hired because the current point man on Central America, Assistant Secretary of State Elliott Abrams, is a target of the Iran-Contra investigation. Administration conservatives are so optimistic they want the White House to ask for more money and a longer-term commitment to the Contras. But some Reagan aides say public opinion is very fluid, and that the White House should wait to see if Oliver North's popularity holds up.
After committee members have reviewed the draft of a final report due late this month, disagreements have reemerged. Since Democrats control the committee, their views prevail, and Republicans are outraged by what they've read so far.
It leads one to the conclusion that there was evidence that is in dispute, that there is some evidence that would imply that the president knew about the diversion. And there is no such evidence.
Former National Security Advisor John Poindexter testified that he never told President Reagan that Iran arms sales profits were diverted to Nicaragua's Contras. But one committee member says the report attempts to revive the smoking gun.
But what it does is criticize Admiral Poindexter's credibility or question it. And one by inference could assume that that is an erosion of confidence in the president's position.
Hyde says Republican staffers found 200 items they considered objectionable in the draft report. All 6 House Republican committee members and at least 2 from the Senate intend to publicly disagree with the final report and file their own. Bob Kerr, NBC News at the U.S. Capitol.
The chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee is now promising a thorough investigation of sexual harassment charges against Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas. Last night, the Senate delayed its vote on the Thomas nomination for a week so that Anita Hill's allegations can be checked out. Before the delay, lawmakers heard plenty of advice from constituents, especially from women. Linda Douglas reports.
The debate over sexual harassment has rekindled the fires of feminism all over the country. Thousands of women called their male senators, demanding that Anita Hill's charges against Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas be taken seriously. California Senator John Seymour said his switchboard was flooded with calls.
I think we've had about 1,500 calls today, and I can tell you that approximately 793, I think, oppose the confirmation of Judge Thomas. Another 600 or so say delay, and about 300 say confirm.
The members of the United States Senate realized they were caught in a firestorm, that their constituents, working men and women in this country, and particularly working women, believed these charges were much more serious and much more deserving of serious consideration than the senators themselves had thought.
Congresswoman Barbara Boxer and other female members of Congress urged the senators to delay their vote. They argued the charges against Thomas must be taken seriously.
We need to look at it. Here is Judge Thomas, who was in charge of the agency that was supposed to enforce the rules surrounding sexual harassment.
The Senate will scrutinize Thomas again, as well as his accuser. Linda Douglas for NBC News, Los Angeles.
We're back in the Blue Room of the White House here with President George Bush. President Bush, nice to see you. I know you want to compliment your wife on the excellent job she did with the tour of the White House, but I just wanted to ask you a couple of quick questions since we never see you.
Interview. I came over to, you never see me?
Never see you person to person for an interview.
I came over to congratulate Barbara Bush. I thought it was a fabulous interview. Got the facts out there, and also to get equal time for me and Ranger, because I'm not saying this was a sexist tinge, but the female dog and my wife and Ranger now are excluded.
Hey, we're not sexist on the Today Show. We'll definitely offer you equal time whenever you...
Man Willard,
I know, what can I tell you?
Off these tough questions like how are you and things like that.
How did you think you did in the debates, talking about tough questions? You've been pretty self-deprecating about it. You said yesterday, I'm no Oxford debater, but did you feel comfortable?
Yes, I felt very comfortable. Very.
Let me ask you, if I could, Mr. President, about the Justice Department investigation of William Sessions, the head of the FBI. Can you confirm there is a Justice Department investigation?
I just read it in the paper this morning.
No knowledge of any kind of justice?
No,
all right.
not that I know about.
Well, I can see you're making a move toward the Oval Office. Mr. President, thank you very much. What do you expect to hear in tonight's vice presidential debate before you go?
Come on, Katie. What time do we break for the hour here? I'd like to be on for
We've got 15 more minutes if you'd like to stay with us.
Another segment here.
What are you expecting?
I think Dan Quayle will be... I love these polls. 92% of the people, or 83, think Gore will be the winner. 16 Quayle. He'll do fine. He has taken a real pounding out there, and just so grossly unfair. Do you remember the pounding he took on going into the National Guard? I do. He served his country, and oh, the terrible pounding he got for influence, which was not true, going into the Guard. And now we have a guy running for president who wanted to stay out of everything. And we got to look back. It was 20 years ago. We got to heal the wounds. Come on. Let's have some fairness. Dan Quayle will do great in this debate.
Come on, we got to go.
Thank you so much for talking with Mrs. Bush. Thank you again. Mr. President, could you join us again next week by any chance?
Katie?
Nothing like a live request.
Well,
would you join us next week?
You're what I call a very fair interviewer. You know what a fair is versus an unfair? You give the guy a chance to answer the question. This is an analysis, you didn't ask for this, but I'll give it to you. An analysis of your profession. Some have what I think we call in the trade curveballs. They're pejorative. They know where they want to come out, and they're determined to get the interviewee, whether it's the president or anybody else, to come out there. I'm not saying this gratuitously. They may edit this up here. Is this live?
No, fortunately, we're on live television,
Well,
so please say whatever you'd like.
No, but what I say is,
Have at it, George.
no, but I think when you ask a question, you at least let me listen without interrupting. How can you equate this with that and that? And so there's a fighting chance for this. But I got a lot of stuff to do. You got to understand that.
I know you're a very busy man, but we'd certainly appreciate some more of your time next week if it could be arranged. Yes, we would.
Just you and me alone in these blue chairs here?
Sure.
Let me think about it.
All right.
I've enjoyed this very
Mrs.
much.
Bush, make sure he thinks about it. I'll call you this afternoon. Marlon's probably pulling what hair he has left out.
Hey,
President Bush, thanks again. Thank you. I enjoyed it too. You never know what happens when you wander into the blue room on a Tuesday morning. Thank you, Mr. President. He wants to stay, Mrs. Bush. He's not making any move.
Not really.
Thanks again.
No, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. And we'll be back with more on Today right after this.
Ever notice our justice system is just fine as long as I agree with the verdict. If I don't like the verdict, the system is a disaster. That comment explains in part why African American students at Howard University Law School reacted like this to the Simpson verdict, while whites at a bakery in Chicago reacted like this. Among the less strident observers who have tried to make sense of our racial divisions are Clarence Page, syndicated columnist for the Chicago Tribune. He's in our Washington bureau. And in New York, Frank Rich, columnist for the New York Times. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Rich, let me start with you, if I could. A week ago, you predicted this day in a column when you wrote that, quote, whatever the jury's verdict, this trial will leave only division and anger in its wake. Prescient as that proved to be, are you still surprised at the depth of our divisions?
I'm surprised by the depth, not the fact of it. I think that it was all there. This jury tapped something that was very, very profound in the society, and it came pouring out as if in a bad dream or a nightmare. So the strength of the feeling did surprise me, even though the fact of it didn't.
Clarence, at the heart of it, why do you think blacks and whites have responded at an emotional level so differently to this verdict?
Well, let me say, Frank Rich, as usual, is a very astute observer of our American scene. Blacks and whites have a very different level of faith in the criminal justice system, speaking generally. First of all, not all blacks thought O.J. Simpson was innocent. Let me point that out. I, for one, think he probably was guilty, but there's no doubt in my mind that the case against him was not proved. And if you pay any attention to this case, you'll see the jury didn't have to turn to racial sentiment or solidarity to come forth with a not guilty verdict. Simply on a legalistic level, they could do it. Yet there is a profoundly national negative reaction, especially on the part of most whites, I think, because it shows the great American nightmare, which is blacks rising up and either killing whites or being happy about the death of whites. That's not why there was that happiness at Howard University Law School. There was happiness because a black lawyer won a case for a wealthy black man.
Good morning, everyone, and more now on that White House story. The long and tangled investigation of independent counsel Kenneth Starr is taking a dramatic new turn this morning. Under investigation now, allegations that President Clinton had an affair with a former White House intern and told her to lie about it. NBC's David Bloom joins us from the White House. David, what's the latest on this?
Well, good morning, Sarah. NBC News has confirmed that the Kenneth Starr, the independent counsel, is investigating allegations that President Clinton and his longtime friend Vernon Jordan pressured a 24-year-old former White House intern to lie about whether she'd had an affair with the president. Sources say this new criminal investigation of President Clinton and his close friend and advisor Vernon Jordan focuses on allegations of obstruction of justice, namely that the two men may have encouraged Monica Lewinsky, a former White House intern, to commit perjury. Sources say that federal prosecutor Kenneth Starr has obtained, by one count, more than 20 hours of secretly recorded conversations, some obtained by a friend wearing a body wire, in which Lewinsky describes in intimate detail her alleged year-and-a-half-long sexual affair with the President of the United States. These sources say that after Lewinsky, who began as a 21-year-old intern, left the White House for a political job at the Pentagon, Secret Service records show her entering the White House late at night on repeated occasions. And these sources say that in at least one recently recorded conversation, Lewinsky claims that the president and Jordan told her to deny the affair when questioned under oath by Paula Jones' lawyers. Last night, the former intern's attorney, William Ginsburg, told NBC News, "I've spoken at length to the independent counsel's office." Asked about allegations Lewinsky had an affair with the president, Ginsburg replied, "I can't talk about that. It's attorney-client privilege." Last night, the president's lawyer, Bob Bennett, told NBC News President Clinton adamantly denies that he ever had anything to do with this woman. She is under oath saying she didn't do anything. "I smell a rat here," Bennett said. "They've been trying to get the president from the beginning, and it's never going to end until he's out of office." Vernon Jordan, reached late last night at a New York hotel, told NBC News, "I don't have anything to say, and I'm going back to sleep." No comment. I should point out that the Washington Post broke much of this story early this morning, and that these are, as yet, unproven allegations against the president. But it appears this morning that one of two things is true. Either this young woman lied about her relationship with the president and then told the truth when she swore in an affidavit that they had never had any sexual relationship, or I should add, it's clear that it could be the case that this woman was telling the truth about her relationship in these taped conversations and then lied to cover for the president.
James Carville, who you know.
Great human being.
I'm sure you like him, especially at this time. He has said that this is war between the president and Kenneth Starr. You have said, I understand, to some close friends that this is the last great battle and that one side or the other is going down here.
Well, I don't know if I've been that dramatic. That would sound like a good line from a movie. But I do believe that this is a battle. I mean, look at the very people who are involved in this. They have popped up in other settings. This is the great story here for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it, is this vast right-wing conspiracy that has been conspiring against my husband since the day he announced for president. A few journalists have kind of caught on to it and explained it, but it has not yet been fully revealed to the American public. And actually, you know, in a bizarre sort of way, this may do it.
Has your husband, though, through some of his actions, possibly made it easier for those people to attack him?
Well, you know, Matt, that's a tough question, because I can remember in Bill's very first race in 1974, there was a great effort against him then. One of the funniest things that ever happened, although at the time it wasn't funny, is that the people who were against him claimed that he'd been up in a tree demonstrating against President Nixon during the Texas-Arkansas football game in 1969. It didn't matter that he was in England at the very day listening to the game on shortwave radio. They took a picture out of a newspaper, they cut the head off the man who was in the tree, they put Bill Clinton's head on it, they printed thousands of them, they passed them out in every country church and every country store, so that you had hundreds and thousands of people believing this. Now, I have to say, I don't know what it is about my husband that generates such hostility, but I have seen it for 25 years.
On this vote, the yeas are 228, the nays are 206. Article 1 is adopted.
With those words, an elected president was impeached for the first time in U.S. history, leaving Bill Clinton and the nation uncertain about their futures today, Sunday, December 20th, 1998. Good Sunday morning to all of you. Welcome to Today. I'm Jack Ford.
And I'm Jody Applegate. Thanks for joining us this morning. We've all gotten a bit of a history lesson. Of course, Andrew Johnson was the first president to be impeached, but he was never elected. He became president after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Of course, Bill Clinton was elected twice, a point his defenders always make in arguing why he shouldn't be removed from office.
An historic day for a number of reasons, Jody. And as everyone knows by now, 2 of those 4 articles of impeachment were indeed passed by the House yesterday, which means that sometime after the first of the year, the Senate is expected to conduct a trial to determine whether President Clinton should be removed from office. Jody?
The outcome of yesterday's historic vote in the House was widely expected, but the day still held surprises and dramatic moments. NBC's Joe Johns is on Capitol Hill this morning. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Jody. The case is now in the Senate for the first time since 1868 and only the second time in history. The President of the United States now stands formally accused of high crimes and misdemeanors under the Constitution. passage of the articles was bitterly opposed by most Democrats. To the cheers of anti-impeachment protesters, they walked off the floor of the House while it was still in session in a symbolic protest of Republican refusal to allow censure of the president.
This Congress is ignoring the wishes of the American people.
The rancor took its toll. The major casualty of the day, Congressman Bob Livingston, who had been nominated as the next speaker to replace the outgoing Newt Gingrich. Having admitted marital infidelities earlier in the week, Livingston caught the House off guard by giving up the speakership, pledging to resign his seat in Congress, and challenging the president to step down also.
So I must set the example that I hope President Clinton will follow.
With the House in shock, Republicans proclaimed Livingston a hero, while Democrats said the Republican choice for Speaker should not disqualify himself because of personal failings.
We are losing sight of the distinction between sins, which ought to be between a person and his family and his God, and crimes, which are the concern of the state and of society as a whole.